Dumb, Cool,
Weird
Podcast. All right, folks, welcome to the Dumb, Cool, Weird Podcast. This is Wes, and we are live. So today I have Dr. Young on the podcast, and today's topic is going to be being politically incorrect. And then later on the podcast, we're going to talk about his wonderful book, Deep in the Woods, or Deep in the Forest. Wow, said that wrong.
No problem. Thank you for the plug. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. And we also have Nick, but he's virtual today because he has to go to class.
Have a good one.
I'll be here for like 20, 30 minutes.
So, so like I said, the topic today is being politically incorrect. One of the things I've noticed in society today is we have a lot of, I noticed there's a lot of like wokeness has kind of like infected society.
Right.
And this is something that me and Nick talk about a lot on the podcast. A more conservative view is just not really valued. And the thing is, me and him aren't even really, we wouldn't even consider ourselves conservative. We consider ourselves centrist.
Okay.
And when people look at us, they think that they group us with those groups of folks, and that's how crazy it's gotten now. The people that are in the middle are seen by the really woke left as alt-right or conservative.
Part of the problem.
Yeah.
Right. I hear you. I have noticed that over the course of my lifetime, I'm 60, 59 plus interest to my students. It strikes me that our society has become far more politicized than I can ever recall. And with that increased politicization, there's been a big uptick in the level of intolerance. And I think part of the problem is the fact that we now live in a news media universe. When I was growing up in the 1960s and 70s, we were not remotely as politically conscious as so many Americans are and as our society is today. Because think about it, in the 1960s and 70s, there was only one 30-minute national newscast a day. And it was either ABC, NBC, CBS, and then starting in the late 60s, PBS for 1 hour. But that was it. We didn't have any of these 24/7 cable news networks. We didn't have the internet and all of its 24/7 news sites. We didn't have any social media. And so, quite frankly, we just didn't think about politics much. And there was nothing unusual in having a Republican husband married to a Democratic wife and Republican and Democratic children and grandchildren. Politics just didn't play a big role in our lives. And then I think what happened was, starting with the launch of CNN, the first 24/7 cable news network in June of 1980, and then after that, all the rest, Fox, CNBC, MSNBC, et cetera, we sort of launched ourselves into a new era of 24/7 news. And when you think about it, arguably, do we really need 24 hours of news? And so what happened was, before long, eventually, these 24/7 cable news networks, they evolved into opinion networks. One of the cheapest kinds of shows, I think, to have is a political talk show. And so, and also what happened was, starting in the 90s, we get the internet, and so you get all these heavily ideologically oriented sites. And so I think people are being bombarded with way more news than ever before and way more opinions than ever before. And now I think what's happened is that people are choosing to live in their own media universe. I mean, I know conservatives who will only read maybe the Wall Street Journal as a newspaper, and then will listen to conservative talk radio shows, maybe Sean Hannity, and then they'll watch Fox News, and they'll only read conservative websites, maybe the Daily Caller. And then I know liberals who will only read the New York Times and listen to NPR on the radio and watch CNN or MSNBC, and then just read maybe the Huffington Post and Salon online. And so people are living in separate media universes. They're not being fed the same news or the same opinions. And so I think when someone who is just living in a conservative media bubble bumps into someone living in just a liberal media bubble, they really are much farther apart than conservatives and liberals were 40, 50, 60 years ago.
Mm. Yeah, I think I saw a graph, and it was like a visual graph of like how Congress was back in the 20th century versus now, and it showed like them being more like this to slowly being boop 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 boop, boop like this.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the 1960s, there were lots and lots of bipartisan friendships on Capitol Hill. Mm-hmm. There were way, way more moderate conservative Republicans and moderate liberal Democrats. There was a lot more bipartisan legislation. I have no memory of a single significant law passed in the 60s or 70s that didn't have a lot of bipartisan support. Mm-hmm. Including for controversial stuff like civil rights. Mm-hmm. But I can remember a long time ago, I think it was in the late 80s, the 1964 ultra-conservative Republican presidential nominee, Barry Goldwater, U.S. Senator from Arizona, and the ultra-liberal Democratic 1972 Democratic presidential nominee, George McGovern, another U.S. Senator, they were on PBS together, and boy, they just got along so well. And they really liked each other, and I believe they loved each other. I mean, that was nothing unusual. But what's happened in recent decades is conservatives and liberals are living in not just separate media universes, but we're not even majoring in the same things in college anymore. There are conservative majors like business and math and science and engineering. There are liberal majors like the humanities, art, English, the social sciences. And we don't even watch the same television programs anymore. We don't watch the same movies. Mm-hmm. There's a huge secular divide, a huge religious divide now. It used to be growing up, most people were at least nominally Judeo-Christian. Now, the Republican Party is increasingly the party of the religious. The Democratic Party is increasingly the party of the secular. We don't live in the same neighborhoods or cities. I mean, you look at a red state, blue state map of America. We're living in different states now to such a great extent. We really are a very, very divided country. The political divide, I think, is symptomatic of much deeper-rooted cultural and religious divides. Mm-hmm. And gosh, if you look at more recent decades on Capitol Hill, just this century, I mean, look at all the major bills that got no support from the minority party. I mean, when President Clinton had the biggest tax increase in 1993, I don't think a single Republican in the U.S. House or Senate voted for that. If you look at Obamacare, not a single Republican voted for that. And I guess that was in March of 2010. If you look at the recent U.S. Supreme Court nomination of future Justice Ketanji Jackson, she only got 3 Republican votes. Mm-hmm. That was not the case when I was growing up. When I was growing up, almost all the Republicans and Democrats would vote for whoever was the Democratic or the Republican Party presidential's nominees to be a member of the High Court. So we are a much, much more divided country.
So you're saying back then it was more about, who is the best person for the job, not because of who's popular, basically in each party.
I think that there were a lot more moderate centrist Democrats and Republicans.
Okay.
I think that both parties over the last several decades have moved ever further to the, I don't want to use the word extreme, but to the, I guess I should use the word extreme. Now the bulk of the Republican Party is solidly conservative. The bulk of the Democratic Party is solidly liberal or progressive. Also, what's happened in recent decades, especially this century, is that I dare say a record number of Democratic and Republican congressmen and U.S. senators have been primaried. In other words, now the gerrymandering has gotten to be such a science. The Democrats and Republicans in every state capital in the country, they have fantastic computers. They know where every single Democratic voter lives in the state and where every single Republican voter lives. And so both parties have been very guilty, very skilled at carefully gerrymandering their districts. So what we now have is, of the 435 U.S. House districts, probably no more than about 30 or 40 are really competitive. Most of them are overwhelmingly Democrat or overwhelmingly Republican in terms of the voter breakdown. And so what that has done is that has bred far more ultra-conservative Republicans and ultra-conservative Democrats, because what happens is now in a district that's overwhelmingly Republican, if the Republican congressman is seen as not conservative enough, he will be primaried. A much more conservative Republican will run against him and increasingly will win. And the same phenomenon is going on in Democratic congressional districts, where the Democratic nominee is going to win in November. The real race, the real contest, is in the Democratic primary. And if a Democratic congressman is seen as not being sufficiently progressive, he will be primaried, and he'll be likely beaten by a more liberal or progressive or leftist Democratic candidate in the primary. And so that has polarized the House a lot more.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. When it comes to voting, I usually don't vote based on the party. I vote based on like the candidate that kind of I think fits like what the country needs the best. And not everybody votes like that. I mean,
Right.
I have conservative friends and I have liberal friends, but
Good for you.
But although I will say my more liberal friends are beginning to get on my nerves a little bit more, because they tend to judge me a little bit more than my conservative friends, which is ironic because people who are conservative are supposedly supposed to be the most judgmental. But me and Nick's experience, we've actually started to see where more conservative people are more liberal, and more liberal is more conservative. And what I mean by that is like I guess like intolerance, I guess. Like my conservative friends are a little bit more open-minded and liberal. What were you going to say, Nick?
Well, I was actually going to say, is to go on that, is the fact that when we realize that a lot of the people on the left are going for more woke policies, versus it seems that the new conservatives that are coming up are more libertarian.
I think
So they're more socially liberal, but
I agree completely. What I find is that most of today's conservatives are much more libertarian on matters like sexual freedom, homosexual rights, to some extent abortion, drug legalization, especially marijuana, than conservatives were, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
There's an old saying, and the late conservative columnist Charles Krauthammer came up with a version of this, which goes like this. Most conservatives think of liberals as being well-intentioned but confused, just mistaken, but still good people. Most present-day liberals, or I would certainly say leftists, think of conservatives as not just wrong, but really bad people. And I think that modern identity politics really fuels that. I think what has happened is, starting in the mid-1980s, initially on very elite liberal university campuses in the Northeast and on the West Coast or left coast, we started to see, as the former hippies, protesters from the late 60s were now tenured professors and administrators with real campus power, they started to implement what they called hate speech codes, in which they said it's not enough that now racial minorities, women, members of groups who historically were denied admission to our campus, it's not enough that they are here, but they should be allowed to be here without ever having to be offended or without ever having to hear or read or experience anything that is racist, sexist, homophobic, or anything bigoted. And the administrators would say, who could possibly be in favor of hate speech? Well, the problem is that, as I see it, hate speech could be anything that you say that I don't like, or anything I say that you don't like. And so what happened was, starting in the mid-'80s, again, we saw more and more schools adopting these hate speech codes, but they rapidly multiplied, they rapidly mushroomed. And even though the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 1992 that on all state or government tax-paid public college university campuses where you have to obey the First Amendment, freedom of expression, the court said all these hate speech codes are totally unconstitutional. Unfortunately, from my perspective, as a libertarian and a strict constitutionalist, over the last 30 years, we've seen ever more, not just colleges, but now high schools, middle schools, even grade schools, preschools, embracing, if not literal hate speech codes, certainly a hate speech environment where now increasingly conservatives or even moderates are afraid to voice opinions. And one of the reasons why I formed the Politically Incorrect Club at Gainesville State College, which then became the Gainesville campus of the University of North Georgia, is I wanted all students to feel welcome in a club setting where everybody was encouraged, to speak up. And one of our club mottos was, there's no such thing as a politically correct or incorrect opinion. We welcome all points of view. We're not going to agree or disagree with any point of view, but any point of view that's expressed whenever we discuss all these issues, whatever the students want to discuss at each meeting, we're going to hold up every opinion to debate. And my role as club advisor in the meetings was to play devil's advocate. And so if the students wanted to talk about the death penalty today, and the only folks speaking up were all saying things like, the death penalty is terrible, we need to help rehabilitate these poor murderers, they were abused growing up, I will deliberately say, no, let's fry their asses, hopefully a lot more eloquent than that. But or vice versa. The whole point of the club and of my political science classes was to encourage people to think, to try to present people with as many facts and as many different perspectives as possible, spanning the whole political spectrum, and then letting the students weigh all that information and all those points of view and come to their own conclusions. And just like in class discussion, I would play devil's advocate.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've actually went to a couple of those meetings back in the day.
Oh, thank you. I hope they were fun.
Yeah, they were definitely interesting. Is that club still going?
It is, but, and this may be a reflection on what you mentioned earlier about how we've got some changing times. The last year that I was a professor at UNG in calendar year 2020, some of the more liberal students led an effort to change the name of the club.
Of course they did.
They didn't like the name Politically Incorrect because they said that they thought that the term politically incorrect now implied that you were conservative or right-wing. And so they thought that by getting rid of that name, more non-conservative members would feel comfortable joining. And since it's a small d Democratic club, I said, hey, y'all, I want y'all to name it whatever you want. And so the students came up with all kinds of different nominees for new names, and they ended up choosing the Nighthawks Politics Club. So it's no longer the Politically Incorrect Club. I didn't voice an opinion, and I certainly didn't vote. But I wish that they had not gotten rid of the name. I mean, to me, politically incorrect is a lot more catchy and memorable than the Nighthawks Politics Club. Nighthawks is the name of the mascot of the school. And quite frankly, I mean, the fact that we already had liberal members who were leading members of the club, to me, that sort of refutes the liberals' argument that, hey, liberals are not joining our club because of the name.
Well, I mean, me and Nick have talked about this, but, the late, great George Carlin.
Oh, I adore him. I saw him live at the Fox Theater in March of 1979.
That's amazing. He said that he did a whole bit about how really, really left-leaning people love to change the language, and also conservative people too, to change the language so it sounds better. Like instead of calling someone retarded,
right,
they call them mentally handicapped, or instead
challenged.
or challenged. Or another one, a funny one that he said instead of calling it toilet paper, call it bathroom tissue.
That's right. And I remember, it may have been from the same routine. I think he talked about how over time we obfuscate language. The new terms are inevitably virtually always longer and more convoluted, and you can read more into it. Like, for example, I recall he said that in World War I, we referred to veterans whose nerves were shattered by being around so many shells exploding. We call them shell shock victims. They had shell shock. And then in World War II, we're more sophisticated now, so we now call it battle fatigue. Twice as many syllables. And then after the Vietnam War, we come up with a new term, post-traumatic stress disorder. Wow, 4 words, twice as many words, and way, way more syllables. And of course, you can read so much more into PTSD. Right. George Orwell, who I think wrote the best book about politics I've ever read, 1984. And
I love that book.
He wrote it in 1948. That's how I came up with the title. He just inverted the year. Well, George Orwell wrote a fantastic essay that I think is really timeless called Politics and the English Language, in I think 1937. And so almost 80 years ago, he wrote, or over 80 years ago, he wrote that in any political debate, whoever controls the terms of the debate is going to most likely win. And so, so this is nothing new. I mean, during the abortion wars, which we still have, although they're not as heated as they used to be, but the pro-abortion rights folks, they call themselves pro-choice. Well, who could possibly be against choice? I mean, choice, that's about freedom. That's what America's all about, right? And then the anti-abortion rights folks call themselves the pro-life group. Well, who could possibly be against life? Who's going to have a sign saying, I'm anti-life?
Got to massage that language.
Right, exactly. And getting back to the whole political correctness controversy, these speech codes that restrict what people can say and express on campus, they're not called anti-speech codes or even speech codes. They're called hate speech codes. Who could possibly want to defend hate speech? And if you say now that, hey, I believe that there are 2 sexes, God made Adam and Eve, well, you're now transphobic. Or if you support the traditional definition of marriage between a man and a woman, the biblical definition, you're homophobic. You're terrified. You hate homosexuals and you're terrified of homosexuals. And I think the Reverend Rick Warren put it very well a few years back when he said, look, you can disagree with someone respectfully without hating the person. But I think it's the nature of extremists, whether they're on the far left or the far right, to want to demonize the other. And I think identity politics really, throws fuel on the fire regarding this.
Well, a new one now is one that me and Nick actually make fun of a lot. Is used to be if you were obese,
Right.
you were just fat. And you need to lose weight.
Sure.
Fat
Now
phobic.
you're fat phobic if you don't like people who are obese.
And you're fat
And
shaming.
you can't.
Yeah, and it's not body positivity.
Right.
Also, it
And
also happens to only favor women, though.
women. It doesn't really like they don't. Men are not really brought up in that. And the thing is, me and Nick, we've dealt with weight a good bit off and on over the years, so we understand what it means to be
Yeah.
fat, and we know the health risk that comes with being obese and overweight.
Yes.
It's not good, and you can't talk to people about this. I mean, I was at work, a couple months ago, hell, even like 4 or 5 months ago, and I was talking about how I was losing weight, and this like really obese chick just like came out of nowhere and was like, "You can't talk about stuff like that because that's fat phobic." And I go, "What the fuck is fat phobic?" Because I'd never heard that word before. And then she's like, "It means you're not body positive." And I'm like, "What does that mean?" And then I looked it up, and I looked at her and I go, "Dude, are y'all trying to kill yourselves?" And she goes, "What do you mean?" I was like, "So you're just accepting death? Like this is like somebody who has cancer." And they're sitting there saying, "I don't want to get treatment for my cancer. I'm cancer positive. I'm trying to be don't be cancer phobic. It's really bizarre."
Oh, I think that.
Well,
Go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to say another case that happened with me, and going back to the transphobic situation, was when it came to the Olympics, where these people who had just recently transitioned, are now competing in women's sports. And I was talking
Yeah,
about
the swimmer,
Right.
the swimmer.
Leah Thomas.
Yeah, we talked about the swimmer thing one day too.
Yeah, and the thing about it though is that I was saying that it's not right, and it takes a lot of opportunities away from women. And I got bombarded by people saying that I was transphobic, but none of these people happen to be trans. And then when I had a person come out in my defense who is trans,
Wow.
they had terrible things to say about her because they didn't see her as trans because she was defending what was considered a transphobic opinion.
I think we're living in a Nietzschean world now where reality is a state of mind. It's all relative, to sort of put a cultural spin, Nietzschean spin on Einstein's theory of relativity. The instant I felt certain that the woman who accused Supreme Court then nominee, now Justice Kavanaugh of rape, the instant that I felt certain that she was lying was when her sister was interviewed, and her sister said that her sister was speaking her truth. And
You're talking about Me Too.
right, I mean,
Yeah.
this notion that truth is relative, that and that's Nietzschean. I mean, the notion that I see a camera there, but you see an elephant. Well, it's an elephant to you. I mean, when facts become relative, and when we make a fetish out of protecting people's feelings, I mean, all this safe space obsession. Well, life is not safe. I mean, my guru, Dennis Prager, says you can lead a full life or you can lead a safe life. You cannot lead both.
Absolutely.
And I think that, getting back to your outstanding point about the real lethal dangers of obesity, and Lord knows, I mean, I'm a Christian. I believe we should all obey Christ's command to do unto others as we would have them do unto you. I would never want anyone to make fun of anybody's weight or any aspect of someone that someone can't help. But regarding obesity, the fact is an enormous share of the people in America, of the almost 1 million folks who've died over the last 2.5 years of COVID, were obese. I mean, obesity is a tremendous comorbidity factor for, frankly, not just COVID, but for diabetes, for heart disease, for just a tremendous number of health problems. And so I applaud you for going on a diet, losing weight. I mean, I've dieted too. I've lost weight as well, and this is to be applauded.
I mean, I used to be in really good shape when I was in high school. I was really lean. I was big and
Weren't
muscular.
we all?
Yeah, I was. Well, see, I was an athlete, so
Great.
I was in really good shape for a good bit of my life. And then when I got into college, I gained like 30, 40 pounds because I started drinking beer, and beer has a lot of empty calories in it. And now me and Nick don't really drink anymore, and we've noticed that the weight just is like falling off of us now because
Great.
alcohol plays a big role in that. And because we actually me and him eat pretty decent as it is. It was just the beer was giving us like the extra calories. And
the beer consumption, it was killing every good thing that
all the gains we were doing in the gym. But the thing is, like, that really gets me frustrated though is people get really, really upset when you point out, hey, maybe you shouldn't be doing this, and they call you this or they call you that. And the thing is, like, my generation, we make fun of people for different reasons, and it's just kind of how we are. I think we do it in a very playful, joking way most of the time, but some people don't like it, and they get offended or upset about it. Me and him poke fun at each other for being fat sometimes, and it's not because we hate each other. We're actually just, it comes out of a place of compassion.
I think context is key. I mean, people, I think most of us, now maybe this is not as true as it used to be, but I think most folks can generally suss people out pretty well in terms of knowing whether you sort of joked with me in a friendly way or whether you really meant to hurt me or insult me. I think most people can figure that out. And so for me, like, let's say if you really were fat, but you and I were close friends and we'd known each other for all our lives, and I made, and we had a history of me making fat jokes at you and maybe you making skinny jokes at me or whatever. To me, there's nothing wrong with that. But if I don't know you from Adam and I just go up to you, or if I just meet you and let's say you have a weight problem and I start making fun of your weight, to me, even if I use the exact same language, the exact same words, same statement, the second example is different because the context is so different. The second example is insulting. And I think with these politically correct, wokesters, I think for them, context seems to mean nothing. And I think ultimately, certainly the leaders of the woke mob, and it is a mob, they're Stalinist. They really do not want, they may say that they want tolerance for everyone and for everyone to be nice to everyone, but really I think they want to destroy, they want to completely delegitimize, even criminalize all points of view, perspectives, lifestyles that they don't like. And so they label it all as hateful, as bigoted, as racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever. And, it's like with the Me Too movement. Hey, I think sexual harassment is awful. And there's no doubt that way too much of it has gone on and still goes on. But I think, again, it depends on the relationship of people. And so I don't know that we can come up with hard and fast rules. What is sexual harassment between Cindy and Johnny may not qualify as sexual harassment between Suzanne and Philip because of their different relationships.
Unfortunately, there's a big double standard with that. When it comes to women accusing men, it's always guilty until you're proven innocent. And if a man accuses a woman of sexual harassment, you're just laughed at. You're like, get out of here. What are you talking about? Sort
of like if a man calls the police for his wife beating him up.
Oh, yeah. You're laughed at. There's a huge double standard there, but I've told Nick on an episode of the podcast, I got Me Too'd back in like 2006 when I was a kid. I was a teenager working at a grocery store, and this girl who was like a year or two younger than me wanted to date me like really bad, and I told her no, I'm not interested. So what she did is she came up with a scheme to get me fired, and she basically told them that I sexually assaulted her. And so they believed her, and they didn't believe me.
I'm so sorry.
Instantly. And what happened was I ended up getting the last laugh because a couple months later, after I got fired and banned from the store for life, they told me, they were like, "Oh, yeah, you're not allowed to ever come to the store again." And then so she texted me like a couple months later, and she's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Of course I'm not okay. You just told everybody I sexually sexually assaulted you." And she was like, "Well, sorry, I had to do that because I wanted to, you wouldn't go out with me." And I was like, "Bam, gotcha." And I saved those text messages, and my dad blew them up on paper, and we took it in there, and I was still banned from the store, messed up, had evidence and all that, but they dropped the other stuff though.
Okay.
So
So you got some justice.
some justice, but not really, because like that's the people on the side of this that people don't understand. It's almost like when they say believe all women, it's almost like they don't. It's almost like they think women are these perfect angels and they're not capable of doing bad stuff. I don't understand that.
We're all sinners.
Yeah.
We all fall so far short of what God wants for us, but he still loves us. And I think that, to your point about hypocrisy, you're right. I mean, Hillary Clinton was basically saying we have to believe all women, but boy, when she was challenged about her husband's extracurricular life, that's different.
Yeah, same. That's the thing. I'm also going to put this out here. I'm an atheist, by the way.
Okay.
So I don't believe in
And
God.
I still love you just as much.
No, and I love you too. Like
Thank you.
just the way you are. I'm an apathetic atheist, meaning I don't care what people believe. But
You're not an evangelistic one.
yeah, but I still have really good morals. Like I
Sure.
see that people are capable of good and evil,
Yes.
and I know how human evolution works.
Right.
And that's why when people say believe all women, I don't trust that shit, because people are capable of doing good things and bad things. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is.
We all sin every day.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like we're capable of doing bad things, and that's why I don't trust when people say that, because I'm like that with men too. If someone's told me believe all men, I'd be like, get the hell out of here. What are you talking about?
Right.
And that's how I feel.
You know what? It reminds me a little bit of something a Canadian buddy of mine told me a long time ago. He said, looking at history, the pendulum swings, and like regarding sexual harassment, I have no doubt, but that if we went back to the 1950s, my thinking is there was way, way more sexual harassment. Oh, well, I'll just speak about my own lifetime. When I remember back to interactions that I witnessed at school, especially in the 60s and 70s, there was light years. There were light years more sexual harassment back then than today, and I don't want us to have any kind of sexual harassment, but back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I think there was a much more of a bias to believe the man, that the woman, she's just bitter that he didn't go out with her or that she didn't get the job or the promotion. And now I think we've gone maybe too far in the opposite direction. And this Canadian buddy of mine, he said, it's like focusing a slide in a microscope. When you first look at it, it's never in focus. So you have to go this way, but you go too far in that direction. Then you have to go back. You have to balance back and forth. And so eventually, hopefully, maybe we'll come to the happy medium, maybe.
So you think like maybe in the next 100 years, maybe we'll hit a happy medium or something like that?
Hopefully, I don't know. I think that whenever there's a consensus, at least among the ruling class, the people who dominate the news media and the popular culture, whenever there's a consensus that all or most everyone of this particular group is right on this issue or is good, and all or most everyone of that particular group is wrong or is bad, that's a prescription for all kinds of abuses taking place, because people will get away. I don't care who we're talking about, people of every group. I think in general there's an inclination, a strong temptation to get away with whatever you can. And so if you know that you're most likely going to be believed regardless of what you say, well, there will be some members of that group who will take advantage of that inappropriately.
That makes sense.
I don't care if it's male, female, white, black, blue, green, Republican, Democrat, whoever. You know what I see as a big problem underlying everything we've been talking about? The lack of tolerance. I mean, if I'm lucky, I'm in the third quarter of life. And so at 60, I've now seen a lot of changes. And to be fair, in a lot of respects, I think America is a much better country than it was when I was a little fella. I mean, when I was a little boy, there were still white and colored only signs.
Wow.
That's right. And in my high school, in the late 70s, we were racially integrated. We had about 2/3 of the student body were white, 1/3 black. But I can say in 4 years of eating virtually every school day in the cafeteria, not once did I ever see a black student seated at a white table or a white student seated at a black table. We were almost completely segregated. The only times we would come together typically were at sporting events. There was not one interracial couple. That would never have been tolerated in either community. So in so many respects, we are a more tolerant society in terms of, I think we're far, far less racist than I can ever recall, far, far less sexist. Golly, we're far, far less bigoted towards homosexuals. I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, the language people would just commonly use about homosexuals in public gatherings, I mean, I cringe thinking back on that. So we are a much, much more tolerant society in a lot of ways today. But in terms of freedom of expression, I really believe we're less tolerant than ever. And ironically, in a really Orwellian fashion, in the name of tolerance. And I think now people, and like I really noticed, I taught for 33 and a half years. From 1987, I was a professor from 1987 through the end of 2020. And what I noticed was that in the last several years of my teaching career, it was harder to elicit a discussion. And I'll never forget the last semester, and I was able to do it, but I just had to, it took more effort. And in the last term of my career as a professor in the fall of 2020, when I was having some trouble asking, getting a discussion going about whether you're conservative or liberal and why or why not, and one student said, well, I'm kind of scared to express my point of view about that. And so students were really increasingly reticent, if not paranoid, about being frank with their views. And I had to really convince them that, look, this is a nurturing educational environment here in this classroom. No one's going to be judged based on whether you're right wing or left wing. I'm going to play devil's advocate politely, respectfully with everybody. And so, and what I found also was that students were just much more quiet in general the last few years I was teaching. I mean, I kid you not, until the last decade of my career, whenever I would walk down the hallway of my building, it was just nonstop noise, particularly between classes. But and when I would walk into a classroom, I would have to begin every class by knocking on the lectern and saying, okay, I know you're excited to hear about prayer and school politics, but we need to settle down a little bit. But over the last decade, even between classes, and there might be 500 people in the halls, it was almost deathly quiet. People were being quiet. And when I would walk into my classroom, it was like walking into a funeral parlor. And why? Because everybody was doing this. They were on their phones. And I think that this contributes to this intolerance. We're increasingly, particularly young people, we're locked into our own little media, hermetically sealed media universe, our own little safe space. And think about it, like with Facebook, anybody who expresses a point of view you don't like, you can unfriend him, you can block her. And in terms of your news media, I'm just going to read sites that agree with me. And so I think that this has lent itself, the social media universe has lent itself to ever more voluntary segregation. But whereas when I was growing up, we segregated each other more based on race, class, sexual orientation, sex. Now I see people voluntarily segregating based on point of view, based on cultural views, political views. And to me, that's really sad. I want us to stay as racially enlightened and sexually enlightened as we are now compared with 40 years ago when I was coming up. But I wish that we would go back 40 years in terms of having much more tolerance for all different points of view.
Oh, I like that. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
So
But
we're getting.
honestly,
What were you gonna say,
oh,
Nick?
I was gonna say, because I'm gonna be heading on out now soon to my class.
Okay.
But I was gonna say that I've witnessed it a lot since I've been back in school, and we're seeing a lot of the student bodies afraid to talk about anything just because they don't want to be ostracized, or even the fact that you don't want to have to create very awkward working relationships with other students when it comes to in-class assignments later on. I mean, I think we've gotten to the point where I kind of look at society like we're almost reaching levels of Starship Trooper level of implications. Like the pendulum's going to swing back.
Yeah. By the way, Nick was in the Marines
Oh, thank you so much for your service. God bless you.
Thank you very much. It's honestly that's it's always awkward.
And that's why he was really confused, because the military is very different than the real world, and he was in there with the structure, and hard science is hard science in the military.
Sure.
And then when he came out, he was like so confused. So.
Well, I mean, even honestly, socially, it's just so confusing, because it's like there are little things that we're talking about that people worry about. We don't worry about that on a large scale. It doesn't matter to us. Like, your sexuality doesn't matter, your race doesn't matter. It's just based on, can you do your job and
character, your character.
Right. I was blessed to teach so many veterans, and veterans of the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And I remember one of them telling me that, gosh, between battles, I mean, they would make fun of each other's sexuality and all kinds of other group characteristics, and they all got along, and I bet you they loved each other. And again, I go back to context, and talking about generational conflict. The supposed conflict between the baby boomers, people born between 1946 and 1964, and the millennials, people born in the 80s and 90s and maybe early 2000s. There's always some generational conflict, because each generation has different sets of circumstances, different environments within which to come up. But if you think about it, other than your spouse or maybe your girlfriend or boyfriend, who is it in our lives who we love more than anyone else? Probably our parents or grandparents or our children. Well, by definition, those are people of different generations. And if you think about it, who is it who we disagree with the most? Who is it who we have the most conflict with in our lives? The very people we love the most. Our parents, our children, our spouse, our girlfriend or boyfriend. And I'm reminded of a quote from William Faulkner, who wrote, "You never love because, but always despite. Not because of the virtues, but despite the faults." It's like if you see an old lady and she's been married for 70 years, and you ask her, gee, how have you been married to your husband for so long? How did y'all do it? And she's liable to say, Lord knows he still snores like a freight train, and he eats his food with his mouth open sometimes, and he's even broken wind in public now and then, but I still love him. And she does. She loves him more than anyone else in the whole world. So I hope that I wish that people all over the political spectrum would realize that we all share so much more in common than we realize. And we really should emphasize what we have in common with each other. Most people, we're all sinners. We live in a fallen world, but I think most people are basically well-intentioned. And I think if we would obey Christ's golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and if we practice real tolerance that way, and if we didn't go around with this mindset of, I've got a big chip on my shoulder, and if you say anything, or in any way express something that I disagree with, that is by definition, you're being evidence of intolerance on your part towards me, if we had that mindset, that's looking for conflict. And I wish that we had a more live and let live traditional American freedom mindset. And I worry that in too many schools now, we don't teach tolerance. We say we do, but we don't. We don't really teach the value of the First Amendment and freedom of speech and freedom of press. I think if we adopted a more Jeffersonian view, we would all get along so much better.
No, that's good. Nick, do you need to go?
Yeah, and I was just going to say it was nice hearing from you again, Dr. Young. I never had any of your classes. I always said great things.
Oh, well, you're very kind.
I hope you have a good rest of your day. I'm going to be out, gentlemen.
All right.
Thank you so much, kind sir. Best wishes always.
All right, bye.
Thank you very much. You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, so now that we don't have him on here anymore, we can actually focus, move on to the book.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Yeah, so before we move to this, though, let's wrap up this. So yeah, all the stuff you said, I think is very enlightening, and I hope that people watching this podcast will hear what Dr. Young has to say, because it'll be for a better future. And to kind of add what you're saying about people who stay together, the old generation that stay together for long periods of time, it's not like that anymore with my generation. The first sign of trouble, people will dip and they will leave and they don't want to do stuff anymore. I've literally dated so many people, and I have had sexual encounters with a lot of people, and I think a lot of it has to do with my generation, just kind of how we kind of view the world. If there's any kind of little bit of conflict, most people will, what we call ghosting, is where they just leave and they don't tell you about it, or they just don't want to be with you.
Do you think so? I mean, I should defer to you totally about young people today, but my guess, just thinking out loud off the top of my head, is that social media might accentuate this, because again, if I don't like what you're posting, I can unfriend you, or I can block you. I mean, is it now that we live in a media universe, we can more carefully segregate ourselves?
So people think it has a lot to do with hypergamy. You know how hypergamy is? Hypergamy is basically where you think your value is higher than it really is.
Okay.
So you have these people, in my case it's women, because I mostly date women. I see women who think that their value is higher than it really is. Like, these women think that they deserve a guy that's a 10 out of 10, making $500,000. I've seriously had women say this to me before, like, when they would either get drunk or they would just, they would be like just off, like they don't realize what they're saying, but it's like their true feelings about what they want. I've had some women say like, hey, I think I deserve a guy that makes $500,000 a year, and he's a 10 out of 10 guy, which means he's smart, funny, and like the best looking guy on the planet. Unfortunately, women who are watching this, in my case, I mean, I'm sure men have hypergamy too. I'm sure it happens often. I just don't know that side of it because I don't date men very often. And I'm also bisexual, but I don't usually date men very often. I mostly date women because I'm mostly attracted to women. But I will say that when these women think this, and then when you ask them the question, they think they deserve this. And the thing is, most of these women are, like average at best, which is, I think being average is fine. I think most Americans are average people.
And it's a state of mind.
Yeah, it's a state of mind. And I think that's okay. But they think they deserve these things. But really, the reality is those type of men make up like 0.5% of the population of men. Most men that you're going to encounter is going to be like the top 40% of men, which is like people who make like $50,000 to $80,000 a year. They don't make $500,000 a year, and they're not going to fit every one of those check boxes. I mean, I watched a video the other day where this girl was like talking about how, I wish I'm a really great woman. I just don't know why I can't find a guy. And she goes, but this is what I'm looking for in a guy. And her list was 20 different things that she wanted in a guy.
My guess is that a lot of folks have super high self-esteem. I envy them.
And I guess what I was trying to get around with, to circle back around, is I think it's social media that does this to them, because they get those dopamine hits from all these thirsty people liking them. And
I have 2,000 friends.
Yeah.
I have 3,000 friends.
Yeah, and they all like me just the way I am. And, if I can get any of these people, then I deserve to have the best of the best. And the thing is, like, perfect example of me, I dated a woman who was on the same level as me, like in terms of attractiveness and stuff. And she told me one night when she was really intoxicated that she wanted a guy who was making $500,000 a year and all these different things. And I said, do you deserve a guy like that? And she goes, what do you mean? I was like, what are you actively doing to get a guy like that? And she goes, I just want a guy to take care of me so I don't have to do anything. And I'm like, that guy's not going to get with you. You don't bring anything to the table. And I told her, I was like, and you know what? If a woman who is a top tier woman wants a guy, I would expect her to feel the same way. What does she get out of being with this guy? Does this guy do anything for her? And what value does she bring to them, vice versa? Because the guy who makes all that money or the girl that makes all that money, the value is that they have this stable lifestyle. And you want to come into that stable lifestyle. What do you add to their stable lifestyle? You know, that's what because I always thought that relationships aren't supposed to be a leech situation. It's supposed to be a symbiotic type of thing. That's just my opinion.
I like to think that people will choose a mate based on who complements them the best. Where there's a deep emotional, even a spiritual connection. I don't think that it's wrong or immoral for a young lady to want a husband who's going to be a strong provider, protector. Yeah. I don't think it's wrong for a gentleman to want an attractive lady who will be a good helpmate, a good mother of his children. But I can't help but wonder if the increasingly secular culture in which we live, in which marriage has been ever more minimized as a priority, and career has been really emphasized ever more, especially with the rise of modern feminism in the late 60s, especially among young ladies. Back in the 1960s, most girls wanted to get married at what would now be considered a very young age and to have many children. And now, my guess is, I haven't seen data, but my guess is that while most young ladies do want to eventually marry, they're in no rush. And so I think where you have a culture now in which the average American male or female doesn't get married for the first time until the late 20s and increasingly well after that, that lends itself to a lot more transitory, brief relationships, and especially if people are focused so much more on their career and their individual selves, that probably lends itself to ever more of a hookup culture, and maybe to, as you said, regarding the increased role that social media is playing in our lives, this notion that, well, hey, I don't have to put up with you. I have all these other Facebook friends.
I have options is basically what it is.
Right. And I think that's unfortunate. I wish people, if people want a long-term relationship, I think they should date for that and be upfront with someone very early in the dating relationship. If people are not interested in that, just be frank about it, so that all the cards are on the table, so to speak, and people know what they're getting into. But I think that particularly with a lot of young ladies, there are some, and with men too, but I think more so with women, there's a real risk of more disappointment and even depression with a hookup kind of culture. But it can certainly apply to men too. I just wish people would we should all treat everybody with more respect. Treat others how we want to be treated.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's a good place to end on the politically incorrect stuff. And I appreciate all the, words, wisdom that you gave to us today. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome. And let me just say, as I tried to remember to frequently remind my classes, whenever I would, tip my hat and give my views on some issue, any little opinion of Dr. Young's plus $1.50 will buy you a Coke. Always think for yourself.
Awesome. And, before we get into the book, let's preface, your background. So can you tell us a little bit about your education and all that stuff, like where you went to school, like what your background is?
I was born in Bartow, Florida on December 17th, 1961. The family moved to Athens, Georgia. in 1966. My father got his doctoral degree there and became a professor at the university, so I grew up a faculty brat in Athens. I was the personification of painfully shy, too scared to leave town to go to college, and so I went to college and graduate school in Athens. I got my first professorial gig at Gordon College in Barnesville, about 50 miles south of Atlanta, in 1987, where I taught political science and history from 1987 to 1999. And then in 1999, I moved to Gainesville, Georgia, where I taught at what was then Gainesville College. It became Gainesville State College. And then in 2013, it became the Gainesville branch of the University of North Georgia. And I taught political science and history, mostly political science, from 1989 through the end of 2020. And then, after teaching college for 33 and a half years, I decided to take advantage of a very generous, one-time only University System of Georgia statewide offer of early retirement for all more senior professors in the state. And I thought, let me do this because if I miss teaching, if I'm really jonesing to get back in the classroom, I can always go back and teach part-time. And the beauty of that is I can just do the fun stuff, just teaching in the classroom and advising students. I don't have to deal with the educrats and all the paperwork. And I retired largely because I had done everything I ever wanted to do teaching. I taught 20 different courses. I was blessed to have a lot of success. And I thought, ever since I fell in love with American literature in ninth grade in Elliot Wasserman's English class, I've nurtured a dream of wanting to become a novelist. And I was pushing 60, and I realized if ever I'm going to fulfill my dream, now's the time. And so since retiring from the professoriate in December of 2020, I've been a full-time writer, and I've been very blessed to get a number of essays published. Now, I'd been an essayist for decades before that, and I've gotten a lot more poems published, and I've been blessed to get my first short stories published. My first novel, Deep in the Forest, came out last July. And I'm now editing my second novel, Due South, which should be out later this year. And so I've just really loved this second career of being a full-time writer. And I'm deeply touched that the first novel has gotten tremendous reviews. When I checked last on Amazon, it had 57 reader reviews. All are positive. Over 50 are 5-star raves. Ditto regarding all the reviews on Barnes & Noble are positive. So I've just been thrilled, just absolutely elated at the reaction it's gotten. People ranging in age literally from 12 to 92 have expressed how much they enjoyed it. And it is a fun read. It's a dramedy, a comedy drama that I think is inspirational. I hope so. And it has lots of laughs. And it really transcends a lot of different genres. And it's just a really enjoyable read. It's not heavy reading, but I think there really is something in it for most everybody.
Yeah, it's 189 pages, which is, that would be a pretty easy read. So I think it's, getting your feet wet in the novel game. But the back says this. It says Elton Peabody is a 35-year-old high school history teacher in a small southern town who has a terrifying experience one night with a mysterious bright light deep in the forest behind his house. Did he encounter a UFO, a secret government project, a high-tech prank, angels, a mental breakdown, or something else? This is his journey to understand what happened and move on with his life in the face of increased public scrutiny. His story encompasses family dynamics, especially between Elton and his younger brother, the local sheriff, the drama of the sheriff's election, and it says high school life as seen from a young teacher's perspective, friendship, lots of humor, and search for religious meaning, summoning the courage to face one's fears, and taking risks for romance. So that's definitely interesting.
Thank you.
Like when I was telling you when we were walking up, I'm a huge fan of like mystery novels.
Great.
I love the whole show but don't tell in detail. Like for instance, like in movies, what I really like is when you see something happen, but it's left into interpretation of what this person saw. That's kind of like that movie. You ever seen that movie Phenomenon with John Travolta and Forrest Whitaker?
I don't think so. Sorry.
It kind of gives me those vibes a little bit.
Okay.
Basically, what happens is John Travolta's character is like this small town like guy that owns a mechanic shop, and he has an experience with like a bright light in the sky, and all of a sudden he gains like really hyper intelligence. And people like he like speculates, and other people speculate that he might have had contact with aliens that made him super intelligent, and then but also it could be that his brain might have had like something happen to it, and that's what made him super intelligent. But either way, his life was significantly shortened, and he figures out by the end of the movie that he's going to die pretty soon. So it's pretty good movie, but it kind of gives me those vibes a little bit, except minus the whole hyper intelligence and stuff.
The genesis of this novel really is my childhood. Not that I ever had a UFO experience, although I would love one, but I was really blessed to be a small child during the moonwalk era.
Oh, nice.
From 1969 to 72, and that was so thrilling to literally watch on live TV heretofore science fiction become scientific fact. And in the early 1970s, when I was young, just a young boy, that's when we saw a huge uptick in UFO stories being reported in the news media. Eric Von Daniken's book, Chariots of the Gods, came out in the late 60s, I think. And
the Bob Lazar story.
Sure. And so I've always loved reading articles about UFO encounters and watching documentaries about them. But what always struck me was, in virtually all of them, we would only learn about the supposed event, the encounter. There would be nothing about, well, what happened to the rest of the life of that poor person who saw the aliens, and how did that person make sense of what happened? Particularly, if the person who had the UFO encounter didn't really know what the UFO was. Was it little alien green men, or was it a military experiment, or did he have a mental breakdown, whatever? And how might the rest of the people in that person's life treat him differently? And so that was the real idea for this novel. I wanted the main character, Elton Peabody, to have this strange, bizarre experience with this weird, bright light deep in the forest behind his backyard. I wanted him to have that in the first chapter, as he does, but for him to not know what it was. And so there is that mysterious element to the story, but he's a shy person, but yet now he's thrust into the public spotlight. Locals, there were other reports of UFOs, and locals are wanting to know, well, what happened to him? Oh, he's that UFO guy now. And so 95% of the novel deals with how he comes to terms with this experience. He's not just trying to figure out what happened, but more importantly, he's having to go on with the rest of his life to figure out, well, why did this experience happen to me? And how are other people treating me differently? How am I going to have to deal with this? And he finds out who his real friends are. He finds out the importance of family. And he ultimately learns that maybe the most important lesson in life is not just to be good, but to be courageous. He learns through painful experience that the only times that he grows, that he matures, that he gets stronger, that he overcomes his fears is when he faces them, is when he confronts them. And he realizes, I think, ultimately that he is his own ultimate big bogeyman. He's the source of his fears. And he's a shy person, and I really believe that shyness is a curse. I know today there's, I think, sort of a mindset that shyness, oh, isn't that cute? He's shy. Shyness really inhibits people. Shyness is a sign of deep insecurity. Shyness is a fear to fully engage life. And Elton, at the start of the novel, is leading a very constricted life. He's a workaholic, just teaching at a local high school. He's not dating. He doesn't want to be rejected. And this experience encountering a UFO or whatever it was, it forces him to come out of his shell because other people are now questioning him. Well, what happened? What are you doing? And he realizes that life doesn't have to be so frightening.
And so basically in this story, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's, the UFO experience is just the catalyst for this,
Yes.
for the journey for this guy to go from being, more of a shy person to being more confident and be more outgoing with people around him in his life, right?
Right. He realizes, you could argue has one of his worst nightmares come true. He is thrust against his will into a glaring public spotlight. A number of people are making fun of him, are ridiculing him, but he realizes it's okay. I haven't been physically harmed, and it's a state of mind. My whole world runs from here all the way to there. And the people who really love him, who really respect him, they remain friends. They remain close. And so he comes out of his shell, and he realizes that life doesn't have to be and shouldn't be nearly as frightening as he'd want it to be. And so I know that is a lot of drama, but trust me, and ask anyone who's read the book, there are loads and loads of laughs. It's a comedy drama. It's a dramedy, if you will, a dramatic comedy. But it really does have a lot of genres. Science fiction, you could argue, mystery, family dynamics, friendship, high school dynamics, local politics. But the words Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal are never used. This is not a politicized book. It really has almost nothing to do with what we were talking about earlier. But there's also romance. It's a completely clean book. I'd say it's probably rated G or PG-13. There's no smoking, drinking, drugs, gambling, sex, violence, or profanity. I wanted my parents to read it and enjoy it. But it's still a lot of fun.
It sounds like it's a book about the human condition in a lot of ways.
I think so. And it's about something that I haven't read. I haven't read any other novel with this starting point, with this theme. It takes place in a small southern town, probably late 20th, early 21st century, so contemporary. But I think that it's got universal themes. I don't think that you need to be remotely a Southerner living in the 21st century to fully appreciate it.
Okay.
And it was a joy to write. It was the most enjoyable creative endeavor of my life.
Well, that's great. Where can people pick this up at?
Oh gosh, you could get it on so many websites: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Speedy Hen, I think it's Bocanos, just loads of them. Goodreads. There's a German site I can't pronounce. A Swedish site I can't pronounce.
Okay.
And
definitely Amazon.
Definitely, yes, sir.
Yeah, because most people buy stuff on Amazon.
Right.
These days.
And shop and compare. The prices are different. There are no two websites that have it priced at the same amount. So,
okay. Well, cool.
Get whatever's the cheapest one you can find.
Well, folks, deep in the forest, it's family friendly, and if you like comedies with a little bit of drama in there, and apparently a little bit of a mystery, sci-fi element to it, this seems like a good book to check out. Like Dr. Young said, I think this is it's only 189 pages. So that's, it'd be like a good quick read for, people of a younger age all the way up to, older adults. So
take it to the beach this summer.
Yeah, there you go. Take it to the beach. Maybe you'll come up with your own little adventure on the beach.
I think it's what you make of it. It's funny, but it also is, I believe, quite thought-provoking. It does deal with a lot of heavy-duty issues. There's some religion in it. The book is in no way, shape, or form pushing religion, but one of the things that Elton is grappling with is, why would God allow such a frightening experience befall me? And can I go on with the rest of my life not knowing what I experienced? And his pastor tells him, look, Elton, we're not put here to learn everything, to understand everything, to know everything. We're not God. And that's okay. We don't have to figure it all out. And I think that one of the most important facts of life, especially as I've gotten older, is ambiguity. Life is full of ambiguity. But I think we're in this ever more scientific, high-tech, secular age, we're less comfortable with living with mystery or ambiguity. We now believe that science should settle everything. We can't handle mystery. I think earlier, more religious generations, and you could argue maybe more superstitious, but earlier folks just accepted that so much of life is a mystery. The church would famously say, oh, it's a mystery, it's a mystery. Today, I think we're less willing to embrace that. And unfortunately, I think we're living in a more neurotic time. Freud has my all-time favorite definition of neurosis. Freud said neurosis is the inability to handle ambiguity. No. But I think the more we learn from science, the more we learn that there's so much more to this existence, to the world, to life that we don't know. And we may never know. And I think that's still okay. So it's okay to go through life realizing, I think I know certain things, but there's a whole lot I don't know. And that's all right. That's okay.
Well, as an atheist, I can honestly say I'm okay saying I don't know. Because I think there's a lot of things we don't know about the universe. I think as a civilization, we're pretty young, in my opinion.
Yes.
We have a long ways to go. I mean,
I hope.
Who knows what we'll know if our civilization survives, who knows what we'll know in a couple thousand years of, development. Who knows? But I'm not scared. I'm one of the people, I'm not scared to say I don't know everything. And there's there's a lot of big questions. Like for instance, we don't know how life started on Earth. We think abiogenesis is a good, explanation for it, but we have no evidence for it yet. So there's a lot of things out there we don't really know about. So
that's true, and I certainly don't know either. I mean, I desperately want to believe there's a God. I desperately want to believe there's an afterlife, that this is not it. But I don't know that, if I'm honest. And Adam Carolla, who's one of my favorite comics, and he's an atheist, Adam Carolla has said, look, if believers were really sincere, then why do believers go to such great lengths to avoid death, to prolong death, to delay death?
Because they're somewhere in their mind, I think the human condition is to be unsure.
Right. I mean, it's maybe, what was it Maslow said, the ultimate, the top need is survival, right?
Yeah.
Self-preservation.
Well, because I
think that's right.
But we also enjoy having life. I mean, life is as much as we all talk about, oh, this place sucks, life sucks, this blah blah. I think deep down we actually enjoy being alive. And,
I hope.
And we enjoy being conscious. Like what I mean by conscious is humans are like the only animals on the earth that are like self-aware for the most part. I mean, other apes, to our knowledge. I mean, other apes kind of can pass there's a test you can do to show that they can see, like you mark their face, an animal's face, and they look in the mirror, and they can, if they look at it in the mirror and they touch it like this, that means that they're self-aware of themselves. But they're not self-aware like we are. We think about the future. We think about concepts of reality, and we don't know if other animals think like that, like we do, because the only example of intelligence is ourselves. We can kind of test like certain levels of intelligence. Like for instance, crows are really smart, but we don't know if other apes, for instance, have the same, like think about the same things we think about in terms of like the world around them and questioning why existence is, that's just really deep philosophical things that humans do. And I think that's where religion, in my opinion, I think that's where religion came from. I think religion came from human beings trying to make sense of the universe.
Yes. And the late Unitarian Universalist minister Forrester Church, son of the late U.S. Senator from Idaho, Frank Church, he put it, I think, very well, and forgive me, I'm going to have to paraphrase this, but he said, religion is the result of people understanding that they have to eventually die. and they want to try to make sense of this
death,
life.
yeah.
I mean, I think that we all desperately need a purpose in life. We desperately need meaning. And whether people get that from religion or from work or love or family or whatever, we need that. And I worry that in today's America, with a record number and share of Americans living alone and not having stable relationships, I worry that we're too isolated, we're too lonely. You know, one of my favorite novelists and an atheist, Kurt Vonnegut, he was an alcoholic, and he said decades ago that at so many AA meetings, a number of the people who show up are not really alcoholic, but they're just painfully lonely, and they need some kind of community.
And they're trying to fill the void with substances, you know.
Or not, but he was saying they don't even drink. They're not truly alcoholic, but they're just desperately lonely, and they need some kind of community. And I think especially now that far fewer people are going to church, and we don't have nearly as many social groups like we used to. Not nearly as many people are Rotarians or Kiwanians or Civitan Club members, that kind of thing. We're just living in ever more isolated lives. I'm going to seal myself into my own little social media universe and my own home entertainment center. And that's a prescription for real loneliness. We need human connection.
Which is, you know, and that makes sense biologically too, because biologically human beings are a social species. We're one of the most social species on the planet. We really crave, you know, being around each other a lot.
Right.
Even you know, I'm actually autistic, and even with me, being autistic, I prefer to not be around people all the time. But even being autistic, I'm still very social. You know, I like to talk to people. I like to interact with people. So, but I think that's a good note to end it. You should definitely check out his book, Deep in the Forest, you know, by Dr. Young. It's a comedy, drama. Check it out on Amazon. And as usual, check out our website, www.dumbcoolweird.com. You know, please, you know, like, comment, and subscribe on this podcast episode. If you have any questions for Dr. Young, post them down there, and I'll ask them, and I'll get a reply, and I'll send the reply. And as always, check out our merch store on our website. We have a bunch of really cool merch with our stuff on it, and we just now got a new logo made, so we're going to have new merch coming out with the new logo, which is cool.
Could I give my email address, please?
Sure, go for it.
If anybody has any questions or comments about anything we've said today or anything about the book, you're welcome to email me at douglas.young@ung.edu, douglas.young@ung.edu.
And do you have a website?
No, sir, I don't. I'm on Facebook,
Okay.
And there's a Deep in the Forest page on Facebook as well.
All right, cool.
And there's still a UNG Politically Incorrect Club page on Facebook that I'm an administrator for.
All right, cool. All right. Well, thank you for your time. And since Nick is not here, stay sexy, Atlanta.
Thank you so very much for having me. I'm so honored to be here. Many, many thanks, and best wishes always. God bless.
All right, thank you. Thanks for checking out the Dumb Cool Weird podcast. Go to our website, www.dumbcoolweird.com, to check out our merch and all our social media links. If you want to check out how to support us and our audio podcasts only, and an access to our website and all of our other links for our social media, go to linktree.com, which has Dumb Cool Weird podcast. The link is up below. Hope you guys will check us out. We have new content coming out every single Monday. We have new content coming out every single day. Check it for 9 a.m. Clips, reactions, whatever. We got it coming for you. Hope you come out, check it out. Stay sexy, Atlanta, and keep watching our crap.